record. I'm your host, Loudmouth Luke, and today we're taking a look at one of the most legendary alternative albums by one of the biggest alternative bands, Panic at the Disco's Pretty Odd. But before we talk about the album, I think it's best to get some context of the band and my personal experience with the music. Las Vegas-based alternative band Panic at the Disco has been one of the most popular acts in the scene over the last 20 years and have continued to have a massive fan base even after the project ended in early 2023. Originally starting as a band consisting of some high school friends, over time became vocalist Brendan Urie's solo project after each member had left up to that point. And because of the constant lineup changes, a lot of their sounds started to change and that became more divisive. In regards to my personal experience with the band, I remember they were really big when I was in junior high, especially in mid-2016 when the Death of a Bachelor album came out, and my mom and my sister were huge fans and even saw them in concert twice, so I know most of their hits, and I enjoy most of the songs that I know, but I was never really a super big fan, and I never really knew why. And don't get me wrong, I always liked them, but I was never as in love with them as a lot of people I knew were. I never really checked out any of their albums, and that's weird because I was a huge fan of a lot of other bands of their time, like Paramore or My Chemical Romance. Regardless, earlier this year I listened to their debut album 2005's A Fever You Can't Sweat Out for the first time, and I remember really enjoying it, and I re-listened to it the other day to both jog my memory and to compare it to what we're looking at today. I love how theatric and energetic the instrumentation of the album is. It's got so much catchy hooks and so much style and personality. It's easily one of the best debuts of any band I've ever heard. I knew most of the well-known songs from the album, and aside from those songs, I really did enjoy the song Time to Dance. And I did enjoy all the other songs, but since most of the song titles are so long and convoluted, it's really difficult to remember which one is which. I always have to be like, wait, which one's that one? How does it go? But regardless, it's a fantastic album, and if you've never listened to it, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Now, onto the subject of the album we're looking at today, Pretty Odd. This album is considered a classic and one of, if not the best album released by Panic at the Disco according to fans and critics of the band, even considered the last great album by them. Notably, this is the last album that features Ryan Ross, who was the main songwriter and creative force of Panic at the Disco up to this point, and because of his departure, a lot of their projects became a lot more divisive due to the, once again, change in sound, and just overall people feeling like he was the only reason they were any good. This is my first time listening to Pretty Odd in full, so I'm very excited to see what it has in stores and how it compares to its predecessor. Regardless, let's take a look at Panic at the Disco's second album, Pretty Odd. The first track is We're So Starving, and it's a great way to start the album. While it's more of an intro than an actual song, it does a great job setting the scenery for what's in store. Starting with a super epic but calm sounding guitar riff and some strings, it's a warm welcome back from the band telling us despite their absence, they're still the same band at the end of the day. Based on the instrumentation from this track, it's a lot more orchestral and a lot of the theatric elements are a lot more emphasized in comparison to its predecessor. Either way, this is a really fun track and it's a great way to start off the album, and it transitions into the first song in one of my personal favorite songs by Panic at the Disco, 9 in the Afternoon. This was the lead single from Pretty Odd and admittedly the only song I knew from it up to this point, but despite that, I still really like it. It's a super fun track, it's bouncy, it's got a really catchy guitar riff, and it's just got overall great instrumentation. I feel as if the lyrics expand on the themes from the previous track, but add a little bit more of a metaphorical element to it. Starting with the line, "Back to the street where we began," I feel like this is them saying that they're going back to their hometown, to go back to their roots from an instrumental and lyrical standpoint. However, I think it's also used as a metaphor for being in a romantic relationship with someone you've known for a while. Either way, I think this is a really good track and I still love it. It always brings a smile to my face, so let's get to the next one. The next song is She's a Handsome Woman, and it's another pretty good song. So far, this is the most rock this album sounds in places, specifically with the guitar work. It has almost kind of a classic rocky feel. My favorite part of the song is the build-up before the chorus kicks in. The lyrics tell the story of a narrator who meets a woman who they find super attractive due to their confidence. Like most of the album, I feel like the lyrics can be kind of a double entendre. In the context of this song, I feel like this attractive woman could be a new sound the band wants to try. However, just like the previous song, I do think that the listener could see this as a very straightforward story about the narrator meeting a woman they find attractive due to their excessive levels of confidence. And while I do really like this song, it does start to show some of the biggest flaws with this album, and that is the excessive levels of metaphors and symbolism that can make the listening experience a little confusing, because it's hard to tell what the song is actually about. But despite that, I still really like this song, and I see it being in my heavy rotation in the future, so let's go and get to the next one. The next song is Do You Know What I'm Seeing, and aside from 9 in the Afternoon, this might be my favorite song so far. Now, first and foremost, I love the instrumental. It's super orchestral and it has a really cool build-up in between the chorus and the verses, and in places it kind of reminds me of some of Danny Elfman's compositions. It fits well into the lyrics too. From what I can gather, the lyrics tell a story of someone who's overly concerned about their significant other possibly leaving them, and that's mainly from the chorus. But it seems like the verses are actually about the weather and nothing else, which Ryan Ross confirmed in an interview around the time this album was released. So that does make the overall meaning of the song a little confusing, but that doesn't really stop me from enjoying it. This is another really great track, and it might even be my favorite so far, so let's keep going. Here's another great track. This one is called The Green Gentleman, or in parentheses, Everything Has Changed, and it's one of the bouncier songs on the album. I immediately started dancing the first time I heard this track. It's genuinely so much fun to listen to. It might even just be a new favorite song in general for me. The bouncy and upbeat feeling of the instrumentation is also further expanded upon in the lyrics. And like most of the album, I feel like the lyrics can be interpreted a couple of ways based on a lot of the themes of the previous songs. Because on one hand, I do think the narrator is telling the story of missing out on a lot of opportunities, but despite that, being very content with where their life's at, even with all the drastic changes in their life. But I also feel like if you add the context of the previous songs, it gives this track a bit of a different meaning. With the context of everything changing in the context of the band, I feel like that could be seen as their change in sound, their change in status, or their just overall change in how far they've come as musicians up to that point. It's a really interesting way to look at the song in the context of the album. But overall, it's a fantastic track, so let's get to the next one. The next track is I Have Friends in Holy Spaces, and while it acts more as an interlude, it's a nice way to keep the album going. The instrumental has this sort of 1940s soul or jazz kind of feel, and it even has this weird filter over the audio which gives it the sound of an older recording, which is pretty cool. The lyrics tell the story of the narrator meeting someone that reminds them a lot of people of their past, and that could be a double entendre, but it could also be pretty straightforward in its lyrical meaning. In the context of the album, the previous love could be them reflecting on a lot of their past, and when writing, going back to basics in some respects. And I also find the line of, "You remind me of some of my famous friends," a little interesting, since that could be interpreted as them taking inspiration from some of their other famous peers that they met over the release cycle of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. But as a whole, I think it's a pretty good track that transitions into another really phenomenal song. The next song of the album is Northern Downpour, and while it's one of the more somber tracks, it's great. Like a majority of the album, I feel like this song has kind of a double meaning. On my first few listens, I thought the song was about the narrator talking about somebody that they really miss. But in the context of the album, I feel like this is another song that's about the band reflecting on their past and their present, being uncertain of where to go at this point in their career. Their debut album was a smash hit, so it must have been very difficult to try and follow that up. Do they continue that sound, or do they try something new? It must have been very difficult to write this album. Either way, I think this is a really good track. The instrumental is so calm, yet it's so powerful, and the lyrics truly expand how powerful the instrumental is, no matter what way you interpret them. Either way, it's a great song, and up next is possibly my favorite song from the album. The next track is When the Day Met the Night, and it's another great track, and so far, this honestly might be my favorite from the album. I love the sitar in the intro and in the outro of the track. I think sitar is such a cool instrument, and it always adds a lot of atmosphere to any piece of music it's on. And I really like the lyrics in this song. It uses the metaphor of the sun and the moon as two different people falling in love, with the moon being someone who's hopeless and down on their luck, and the sun being someone in their life that makes them feel like they have a purpose. It's a track that truly captures that feeling of meeting someone who understands you and makes you feel loved, with the moon also being used as a feeling of darkness or isolation, like there's no light in the world, and the sun acting as the literal light at the end of the tunnel. The symbolism in the lyrics is really what makes this track shine, no pun intended. Going back to the instrumentation, this is also a very orchestral track, and in some cases kind of reminds me of like Broadway or some kind of a musical, and it really works here. In contrast to some of the previous songs, I don't really think there's a double entendre metaphor. I think this is just a straightforward love song, and it really works in that regard. This is easily one of my favorite tracks from the album, and this is continuing to be one of my new personal favorite albums, so let's go and get to the next song to see if it keeps that momentum going. The next track is Passe Cheval, if I pronounced that right, and I just found out that's French for horse's step, which is a type of ballet move. And it's another pretty good song, all things considered. The instrumentation has a very southern rock feel, in the same way of a band like 38 Special, or even some of Lynyrd Skynyrd's earlier stuff. And ironically, with the horse's step thing I mentioned earlier, the rhythm is very gallopy, and I wonder if that was an intentional choice when they named the song. In regards to the lyrics, I feel like they can be interpreted two ways. I think it can either tell the story of someone who is super self-centered, or as kind of the band's own hype anthem. Despite that, I feel like the lyrics tie more in the former. I love the solo in the song, and it reminds me a lot of classic rock, and like previously mentioned, it reminds me a lot of southern rock. Overall, it's a really fun track, but it's not exactly one of my personal favorites, so let's get to the next one. The next song is The Piano Knows Something I Don't Know, and it's one of the more theatric songs from the album, but it's another really great track. I love the build up from the intro verse into the first verse, making it sound a lot more somber, but then starting to build up into this more upbeat sounding track before going back to that somber feeling at the end of the song, even repeating the first verse, which kind of adds a lot of thematic elements that are throughout this album. Adding on to a lot of the previous themes of the album, the lyrics tell the story of Ryan Ross's headspace in the writing process, with the somber parts acting as a lot of the negative aspects, while the more upbeat parts act more as what the art comes to after the writing process is finished. It's a very intriguing look into Ross's mind at the time, and it's another great track. The next track is Behind the Sea, and it's another really good song, although it is one of the more chill ones. The lyrics seem to be about getting out of that drought of the writing process, and that feeling of contentment that you get from being as a successful musician, which is further emphasized by Ryan Ross being the lead vocalist of the song, and also following the previous track that was about the writing process. Overall, this is a pretty good song, and it transitions into the next interlude of the album, but the interlude's a pretty interesting song, all things considered. The next song is Folkin Around, and I gotta emphasize, I said folk, as in F-O-L-K. Regardless, this song goes into a lot more of the romantic themes of the album, which tells the story of a fading relationship of someone who doesn't want to change their ways. Some added context to the history of Panic at the Disco, this song could be about Ryan talking to Brendan, because Ryan Ross wanted to make a lot more Beatles-style rock, while Brendan wanted to be more pop-punky like their predecessor. So this song could be a response to Brendan from Ryan, which is funny because Brendan's singing the song. But also, just like the rest of the album, I do think this song does stand by itself, and it can just tell a straightforward story. Either way, I think it's a pretty good track, so let's get to the next song. The next song is She Had the World, and while it wasn't one of my favorites initially, over time this has become one of my favorite songs from the album. This song definitely has one of the most intriguing instrumentals on the whole album, and it reminds me a lot of the Baroque or the Renaissance era, specifically from the harpsichord, if that's the right instrument name, that's prevalent throughout the song. I didn't really get the chance to mention this, but one of the previous tracks, Behind the Sea, also kind of has sort of a Renaissance feel in the instrumentation, and because of this, I feel like it's sort of a pseudo-sequel to that track. This is one of the other songs where Ryan Ross gets to be the main vocalist, and because of the lyrical subject matter, it makes a lot of sense. Before looking into this album, I talked with a couple of my friends who are very familiar with Panic at the Disco if there's any real trivia or any interesting facts they have about the album, and one of my friends mentioned that this song was about a relationship Ryan Ross was going through around the time. Which does make a lot of sense if you pay attention to the lyrics. It seems to tell the story of a girl who's interested in the narrator of this track, but the narrator doesn't really have that same feeling. Like a lot of the album, I do think this could have an interpreted meaning, which the metaphor could be about reaching your peak as an artist. I do think it is one of the more straightforward songs from a lyrical standpoint. This is a really good track, and it's one of the more intriguing ones on the album, and we're about 2 songs away from this album being over, so I really hope we can keep the ball rolling here. The second to last track of the album, From a Mountain in the Middle of the Cabins, is an interesting song to say the least. It's definitely the most confusing track from a lyrical standpoint, but despite that, I like this song. Like a majority of this album, there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of imagery, so that does make it a little hard to follow, but regardless, I think the song could be interpreted as the burnout of a performer. So in the context, it would be the band members, or in particular, I think it'd be Ryan Ross. And the burnout stemming from doing the same thing over and over again. So in the context of Panic at the Disco, it would likely just be performing over and over again or playing the same songs all the time, which would probably just be from their first album. I especially love the orchestral and even in times classical sound that this track has, and like most of the album, it's one of my favorite parts of the song. While it was a little hard to follow in places, it's another really solid track. We got 1 track left, so let's see if this album goes out with a bang. The final song of the album is Mad as Rabbits, and it wraps this album up in a little bow. It is such a fantastic way to end the album, and it definitely proves that we're going out with a bang. It tells the story of an overtly hardworking man who's lost all joy because of how time-consuming his work can be. I feel like this acts as the closing chapter to the themes of career burnout from some of the songs in the album, with the lyric of reinvent love possibly being seen as a way of Ryan Ross, and the rest of the band for that matter, saying that they need to find a new way to spice things up to continue their passion for the music. And I feel like that adds more meaning to the intro track, with them emphasizing that they're still the same band despite a little bit of stylistic change. Overall, it's another really fun track and a pretty awesome way to end the album. Overall, I think Pretty Odd is a pretty fantastic album that may be even better than its predecessor. I don't fully know if that's the case, but I think this album has a couple different meanings, which adds a lot more layers to it for me. With one of the biggest themes being one of the most compelling, reflecting on their status up to that point in their career. And while make no mistake, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out is fantastic, but lyrically it's not really a deep album by any means. It's a very straightforward album, but it's super fun to listen to. But overall, Pretty Odd is just a much better listening experience as an album in comparison to A Fever You Can't Sweat Out. The only real issue I have is that sometimes the lyrics can be a little too convoluted and hard to follow, but that's only in a few tracks, so it doesn't really ruin the listening experience for me. Once again, it is a little hard to say if I like this more than A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, because I think they both succeed in different ways, with the Fisco having a lot better standalone songs that are easier to dance and jam out to, while in contrast, Pretty Odd is such an incredible listening experience that loops around and wraps together perfectly like the bow of a present. Because of this, I'm giving Pretty Odd a 9 out of 10. It's a fantastic album, and if you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. Well, Side B is finished, and that wraps up another episode of For the Record. Tune in next week for another spin. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you all have a great week.